It's lovely to be here today. I've known Mark for a little while now. I was introduced to him by the Taylors just at the back here. Currently, I'm on pastoral placement with the Australian Army at Rivers Church of Christ, working with David Taylor, and it's through the Taylor family that I was told about Mark and the work that he's doing at the Soldier Recovery Centre as a life coach, and from that we've struck up a couple of conversations which has led to the invitation to come here and share with you this morning, and it's a great pleasure to be able to do that. Mark said before that he give you full word that I was coming, so thanks for turning up anyway. So just to share a little bit about my story before we move into the message this morning. I'm not a long speaker generally in sermons, so I thought I'd fill you in with a couple of minutes just to give you a little bit of my background. This is my 15th year, or I approach my 15th year in the Australian Defence Force, which comes up on the 1st of September. And it's included a lot of exciting things in that time. I started off in the Australian Navy for 4 years, and seen me see all sorts of different exciting things there, including service on submarines and on some of our biggest frigates and supply ships. Also had the opportunity there to represent the Navy at football and play on iconic ovals like Manuka in Canberra and the SCG. So it was filled with lots of great times. But probably one of the things that is most important from that time, in fact the most important thing, was early on in my Navy career was at recruit school. I was brought up in a Christian household, but I'd walked away for probably about a decade. And where I was reintroduced to Christ was that a fellow recruit witnessed to me in the laundry one night, and we still remain friends to this day, and he became a groomsman at me and my wife's wedding, and we still stay in touch with him this day. He's about 15 years on, which was a significant turning point in my life. Throughout the years, as my involvement with the military, what led me onto the path where I now am, onto the in-service training scheme for chaplains, is I was always involved from that point on with things like Military Christian Fellowship, Every Man's Welfare Service, things of that nature. And I kept being said, Luke, you'd make a good chaplain, Luke, you'd make a good chaplain. And I kept saying, no way, I don't want to be a chaplain. You know, I joined because, you know, the stories that my father regaled me with, and service on submarines, and getting to ride in Black Hawks and blow stuff up and try all these different weapons were pretty cool. And I thought, there's no way that I'm trading this in to go to Bible college and become one of those guys that speaks far too long on a Sunday. So that wasn't on the cards for me, and I paid it off each and every time. And it wasn't until it come up again for something like about the 8th time. But this time was with a bit of a difference. It was coming from an officer that I knew, and he wasn't a Christian himself. And he said the same thing to me, Luke, you'd make a good chaplain. And I thought, that's a little bit hard to discount from Christians and from philanthropics, chaplains and so forth. I could sort of go, well, you know, I just don't think that, you know, that's my path. But coming from a guy that wasn't a man of faith, I sort of had to take stock a little bit of that, and turned to my wife and I asked her, what do you think? Should I do a subject at Bible college just to see if there's any sort of tangibility to this? And she looked at me and she said, I don't know why you've hesitated for so long. And from that, the path then, it was pretty clear. One subject become two, and so forth. And a couple of years later, I was picked up for the in-service training scheme. So I'll become a chaplain on the 1st of January next year. We think that we'll probably be headed to Adelaide to take up a position with a unit called 16 ALR, which is the 16th Air Land Regiment, which is the missile regiment of the Australian Army, which is where I think we will be heading next year. So that's a bit of my story, and there's lots more to it, but I look forward to sharing maybe a bit of that with you after the message this morning. But not wanting to be one of those long-winded guys on a Sunday, I'll now move on with the message. But before we do, I just had a Bible reading. It's a bit of a long reading. It comes from Daniel 6, and most of you will be very familiar with it. It's Daniel in the lion's den. So it's verses 1 to 25. And this is This is what it says. It pleased Darius to appoint 120 satraps to rule throughout the kingdom, with 3 administrators over them, one of whom was Daniel. The satraps were made accountable to them so that the king might not suffer loss. Now Daniel so distinguished himself among the administrators that the satraps by his exceptional qualities that the king planned to set him over the whole kingdom. At this, the administrators and the satraps tried to find grounds for charges against Daniel in his conduct of government affairs, but they were unable to do so. They could find no corruption in him because he was trustworthy and neither corrupt nor negligent. Finally, these men said, We will never find any basis for charges against this man Daniel, unless it has something to do with the law of his God. So these administrators and satraps went as a group to the king and said, May King Darius live forever. The royal administrators, prefects, satraps, advisors and governors have all agreed that the king should issue an edict and enforce the decree that anyone who prays to any god or human being during the next 30 days, except to you, your majesty, shall be thrown into the lion's den. Now your majesty, issue the decree and put it in writing so that it cannot be altered, in accordance with the law of the Medes and the Persians, which cannot be repealed. So King Darius put the decree in writing. Now when Daniel learned that the decree had been published, he went home to his upstairs room where the windows opened toward Jerusalem. 3 times a day he got down on his knees and prayed, giving thanks to his God, just as he had done before. Then these men went as a group and found Daniel praying and asking God for help. So they went to the king and spoke to him about his royal decree. Did you not publish a decree that during the next 30 days anyone who prays to any god or human being, except to you, your majesty, would be thrown into the lion's den? The king answered, The decree stands in accordance with the law of the Medes and the Persians, which cannot be repealed. Then they said to the king, Daniel, who is one of the exiles from Judah, pays no attention to you, your majesty, or to the decree you put in writing. He still prays 3 times a day. When the king heard this, he was greatly distressed. He was determined to rescue Daniel and made every effort until sundown to save him. Then the men went as a group to King Darius and said to him, Remember, your majesty, that according to the law of the Medes and the Persians, no decree or edict that the king issues can be changed. So the king gave the order, and they brought Daniel and threw him into the lion's den. The king said to Daniel, May your God whom you serve continually rescue you. A stone was brought and placed over the mouth of the den, and the king sealed it with his own signet ring, with the rings of his nobles, so that Daniel's situation might not be changed. Then the king returned to his palace and spent the night without eating and without any entertainment being brought to him, and he could not sleep. At the first light of dawn the king got up and hurried to the lion's den. When he came near the den, he called to Daniel in an anguished voice, Daniel, servant of the living God, has your God whom you serve continually been able to rescue you from the lions? Daniel answered, May the king live forever. My God sent his angel and shut the mouths of the lions. They have not hurt me because I was found innocent in his sight, nor have I ever done any wrong before you, your majesty. The king was overjoyed and gave orders to lift Daniel out of the den, and when Daniel was lifted from the den, no wound was found on him, because he had trusted in his God. At the king's command, the men who had falsely accused Daniel were brought in and thrown into the lion's den along with their wives and children. And before they reached the floor of the den, the lions overpowered them and crushed all their bones. Then King Darius wrote to all the nations and the people of every language in all the earth, May you prosper greatly. Now, before I get into the message, I just wanted to ask, has anybody heard of a woman by the name of Hetty Green? Actually, before I do that, sorry. Before I do that, I just wanted to let you see the Bible verses that I'll be referring to. I do this always before I begin sermons, just so you can see that the message is grounded in Scripture and not in my opinion. So I always like to do that first. But now I just want to ask, has anybody heard of this lady? A lady named Hetty Green? Nobody? That's okay, because she actually died in 1916. The reason why I asked anyone heard of her is because she's actually quite famous. She was called America's greatest miser. Yep. But she was also known far less affectionately as the Witch of Wall Street. You can sort of see why if you see the picture, can't you? When she died, she left an estate worth estimated between 100 million and 200 million US dollars. This is in 1916. It's equivalent today, we're told from Wikipedia, would be estimated between 2.25 billion and 4.5 billion dollars. But she was also so miserly that she was also so miserly that she was said to have eaten cold oatmeal in order to save the expense of heating the water. And far more tragically, when her son had a severe leg infection, a leg injury, she took so long trying to find a free clinic to treat him that his leg had to be amputated because of advanced infection. Now, I'm sure that she was worried about losing her wealth, so she didn't even enjoy her life. That's because fear is a thief. It is a thief. You see, it will paralyze you and keep you lonely, lead you to make foolish decisions, and eventually rob you of life itself unless you learn to master it. Because mastering fear requires courage, which is what we're talking about today. Now, conquerors possess the courage to defeat their fears. But what is courage? How does it look? You see, we tend to equate courage with heroism, like firefighters running into a burning building, right? Like soldiers in battle. Like police making dangerous arrests. We think of heroes like Seaman Teddy Sheen. This is how the Australian War Memorial describes his heroism. 18-year-old Seaman Teddy Sheen, who served aboard HMAS Armidale in World War II. His heroism is recorded this way. Shortly before 2 p.m. on the 1st of December 1942, Armidale, by then separated from Carew, another ship of the Australian Navy, was attacked by no less than 13 aircraft. The corvette manoeuvred frantically. At 3:15, a torpedo struck her port side, and another hit the engineering spaces. Finally, a bomb struck aft. As the vessel listed heavily to port, the order was given to abandon ship. The survivors leapt into the sea and were machine gunned by the Japanese. Once he had helped to free a life raft, Sheen scrambled back to his gun on the sinking ship. Although wounded in the chest and back, the 18-year-old sailor shot down one bomber and kept other aircraft away from his comrades in the water. He was still seen firing his gun as Armidale slipped below the waves. Or perhaps you identify more with Warrant Officer Ray Simpson VC, whose heroism is recorded like this. An outstanding soldier on the 6th and 11th of May 1969 in the Kontum province, Simpson was commanding local Mongonards, which is a local fighting force, indigenous fighting force, when the leading platoon came under heavy fire. He ran under fire to a wounded Australian advisor and carried him to safety. He then covered the company's withdrawal, still carrying his mate. On a second occasion, he organised the rescue of wounded men trapped by enemy fire, placing himself between them and the enemy until they could withdraw. But we even think of courage when we think of extreme sports. We think of things like bungee jumping, free climbing, activities that involve great risk. And we think of courage as something extraordinary, something unusual, something people are called upon to exhibit only in dangerous and life-threatening situations. But most of the time, we don't think that we need it. Most of the time we view our lives as being governed by the more mundane character qualities, like honesty, integrity, and faithfulness. we tend to identify more with stories of grace and humility and turning the other cheek as qualities that we are called to use on a regular basis. But I want to share with you another story now. This one's a little bit different to the previous two. It's about a kindergarten teacher and a little boy who she was called to help to put on his cowboy boots. He asked for help and she could see why. Even with her pulling and him pushing, the little boot still didn't want to go on. Finally, when the second boot was on, she had worked up quite a sweat. She almost cried when the little boy said, "Teacher, they're on the wrong feet." She looked down and sure enough they were. It wasn't any easier pulling the boots off than it was putting them on. But she managed to keep her cool as together they worked to get the boots back on. This time on the right feet. It was only then that he announced, "These aren't my boots." She bit her tongue rather than scream. "Why didn't you say so?" like she wanted to. And once again she struggled to help him pull the ill-fitting boots off his little feet. No sooner had they got the boots off than he said, "They're my brother's boots. My mum made me wear them today." Stifling a scream, she mustered up the grace she had left to wrestle the ill-fitting boots on his feet again. Helping him to his coat, she asked, "Now where are your mittens?" To which he replied, "I stuffed them in the toes of my boots." I think I heard her trial starts next month. See, which of the three stories that you've just heard do you associate with the most? Is it the valour of Seaman Teddy Sheehan, the bravery of Warrant Officer Ray Simpson VC, or the kindergarten teacher called to exhibit boundless amounts of grace? See, we tend to identify with the poor kindergarten teacher, don't we? Yeah? You see, we just don't see courage coming into play very often. But that point of view is a mistaken one. See, courage is not the same thing as heroism. Courage is not just for extreme situations. In fact, courage is basic to the exercise of virtually every other virtue. Did you know that? Let me say that again for effect. In fact, courage is basic to the exercise of every other virtue. The dictionary defines courage simply as this: the ability to do something that frightens one, bravery. Mark Twain also described it well. He said that courage is resistance to fear, mastery of fear, not absence of fear. See, it takes courage to be honest all the time, doesn't it? Yeah? Have you ever asked yourself, why do we lie? Why do we lie? Why don't we just state the truth clearly and completely? Any thoughts? Yep. You see, the answer is simple. We fear the consequences to do that. What people might think. We're afraid of losing something. Money, our hopes for promotion at work, our reputation and mates' trust and confidence, the respect of our family members, our position at church. And so we fail to be completely honest because we lack courage. It's been said, courage, as they say, is good for the soul, but it can be bad for the reputation. You see, a lack of diligence could be due to a fear of failure. An unwillingness to share your faith can result from a fear of rejection. A refusal to serve others with our time and talents may stem from a fear of being taken advantage of and exploited. And we can stop giving because we fear the economic times. See, courage is foundational to virtually every virtue. So much so that it's really impossible to mature in Christ without it. It's impossible to consistently live in obedience to Christ and have fellowship with Him and please Him as long as we're dominated by fear instead of courage. And that's why this topic is so important, so central to our daily lives as followers of Christ. Without courage, all of our other virtues will be weak and easily compromised. They'll fade away at the slightest challenge. In order for us to be strong, God-honouring disciples, we must exercise courage. So then courage is a quality which allows us to face and defeat fear. But what about people there that are saying, I'm not fearful, I'm just careful? Is anyone thinking that this morning? Let's have a look at that. Careful versus fearful. Understand that careful is cerebral. It's a thought process. Fearful is emotional. Careful is fueled by information, while fearful is fueled by imagination. Careful calculates risk. Fearful avoids risk. Careful wants to achieve success, while fearful wants to avoid failure. Careful is concerned about progress, while fearful is concerned about protection. Now, honestly, if you ask yourself again, are you fearful or careful? It's worth evaluating. There's a man by the name of Adrian Rogers who once told a story about a man who bragged that he had cut off the tail of a man-eating lion with his pocket knife. Does he sound very courageous, this man that he's talking about? Usually when I say that, most people he sounds stupid, which I say, yes, that's probably a pretty fair answer, but he does sound courageous still at this point. But then when the man was challenged and asked why he hadn't cut off the lion's head, the man replied, someone had already done that. So when you get the full light of the situation, we find that the man that Mr. Rogers was talking about wasn't very courageous at all. Now, from our reading this morning from Daniel 6, verses 1 to 25, we read about true courage. But like I said before, courage and heroism are two different things. When you ask yourself, where was the courage that Daniel displayed in that story, what is it in? What act does Daniel do that displays his courage? He prays. He prays. It's not the story of Daniel defeating Goliath or anything like that. It's simply of a man who has the moral courage to do what is right. Just like we are called to do the same thing. And that is true courage. But you might well be asking this morning, how do I become courageous? You see, we know we need it, but some days courage just seems to be lost. Let me share with you 3 points this morning that I hope will help you become courageous. And the first is that greater courage comes from a deeper intimacy with God. From Numbers 14 verse 24, it says this, "But because my servant Caleb has a different spirit and follows me wholeheartedly, I will bring him into the land he went to, and his descendants will inherit it." And in Acts 4 verse 13, when they saw the courage of Peter and John and realized that they were unschooled, ordinary men, they were astonished, and they took note that these men had been with Jesus. And from Joshua 1 verses 1 to 9, "After the death of Moses, the servant of the Lord said to Joshua son of Nun, Moses' aide, 'Moses, my servant, is dead. Now then you and all these people get ready to cross the Jordan River and into the land I'm about to give them, to the Israelites. I will give you every place where you set your foot, as I promised Moses. Your territory will extend from the desert to Lebanon, and from the great river the Euphrates, all the Hittite country to the Mediterranean Sea in the west. No one will be able to stand against you all the days of your life. As I was with Moses, so I will be with you. I will never leave you nor forsake you. Be strong and courageous, because you will lead these people to inherit the land I swore to their ancestors to give them. Be strong and very courageous. Be careful to obey all the law my servant Moses gave you. Do not turn from it to the right or to the left, that you may be successful wherever you go. Keep this book of the law always on your lips. Meditate on it day and night, so that you may be careful to do everything written in it. Then you will be prosperous and successful. Have I not commanded you? Be strong and courageous. Do not be afraid. Do not be discouraged. for the Lord your God will be with you wherever you go. There's a pretty key message in that, isn't there? The second thing is that greater courage comes from courageous associations. From Acts 28 verses 14 to 15 it says this: there were some brothers and sisters who invited us to spend a week with them. And so we came to Rome. The brothers and sisters there had heard that we were coming, and they travelled as far from the Forum Appius and the Three Taverns to meet us. At the sight of these people, Paul thanked God and was encouraged. From 2 Chronicles 15 verses 7 to 8. But as for you, be strong and do not give up, for your work will be rewarded. When Asa heard these words and the prophecy of Azariah, son of Obed, the prophet, he took courage. He removed the detestable idols from the whole land of Judah and Benjamin, and from the towns he had captured in the hills of Ephraim. He repaired the altar of the Lord that was in front of the portico of the Lord's temple. And 2 from 2 Timothy. 2 Timothy 1 verses 3 to 7. I thank God whom I serve as my ancestors did, with a clear conscience. As night and day I constantly remember you in my prayers. Recalling your tears, I long to see you, so that I may be filled with joy. I'm reminded of your sincere faith, which first lived in your grandmother Lois and in your mother Eunice, and now I am persuaded now lives in you also. For this reason I remind you to fan into flame the gift of God which is in you through the laying on of my hands. For the Spirit of God gave us does not make us timid, but gives us power, love, and self-discipline. In 2 Timothy 1 verses 15 to 18, you know that everyone in the province of Asia has deserted me, including Philetus and Hermogenes. May the Lord show mercy to the household of Onesiphorus, because he often refreshed me and was not ashamed of my chains. On the contrary, when he was in Rome, he searched hard for me until he found me. May the Lord grant that he will find mercy from the Lord on that day. You know very well in how many ways he helped me in Ephesus. Before I move on to my last point, I'll share you another story. And it comes... Is anybody familiar with the NCAA? It's the National Collegiate Association of America. Well, in one of their events, a cross-country championship held in Riverside, California, it's recorded that 123 of 128 runners missed a turn. One competitor, Mike DelCavo, stayed on the 10,000 metre course and began waving for fellow runners to follow him. DelCavo was able to convince only 4 other runners to go with him. Asked what his competitors thought of his mid-race decision not to follow the crowd, DelCavo responded, "They thought it was funny that I went the right way." So DelCavo was the one who ran correctly. In the same way, our goal is to run correctly, to finish the race marked out for us by Christ. We can rejoice over those who have the courage to follow, ignoring the laughter of the crowd. As the Apostle Paul said in 2 Timothy 4 verse 7 to 8, I've fought the good fight, I've finished the race, I have kept the faith. Now there is in store for me the crown of righteousness. Our third point this morning in having greater courage is that greater courage comes from walking in obedience. Isaiah 32 verse 17 says, the fruit of that righteousness will be peace, its effect will be quietness and confidence forever. And from 1 John 3 verses 21 to 23. Dear friends, if our hearts do not condemn us, we have confidence before God and receive from him anything we ask, because we keep his commands and do what pleases him. And this is his command, to believe in the name of his Son Jesus Christ and to love one another as he commanded us. I want to share with you something else that I come across. It's from the San Francisco Chronicle. And it's from a headline from the 21st September 2001, and it read, "Freedom and fear are at war." But the truth is that fear is at war with many aspects of life, not just freedom. Fear wars against our health. It wars against us making good decisions. And fear wars against our obedience to God. Fear interferes with all of our life if we'll let it. Let me end simply by saying this. Courage is essential for us to live a Christian life. We need courage to speak God's truth to a society that doesn't want to hear it. We need courage to call people to repent of their sins and turn to Christ. We need courage not to conform to society's standards, but to be obedient to God's standard. Courage is not optional, but essential. As you head into this week, take some time to pray for boldness, confidence, steadfastness, and courage, so that when we are faced with fear, we would have the confidence that God has supplied us abundantly with the courage to face that fear and overcome.